Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Louise. Good morning, Dewald.
Morning.
Welcome back again. It's going to be another exciting one, and like we've said before, and we're all quite excited about this one.
And a little bit nervous as well. we've noticed that we've catching attention across the global arena at the moment, looking at the YouTube and who's been following in the comments. So we certainly have put Lucentlands into the spotlight, and certainly put the Vision260 into the spotlight, which is exactly what I wanted. So we're achieving exactly what we set out to do. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you again.
So maybe I should start again. I think I'm hoping we're going to get a lot of people on live this morning. As I've mentioned, I've shared it on a number of my platforms to hopefully inspire people to join our conversation. Not only live, so we can get some good comments and feedback during the session, and then obviously this will be made available live on the different platforms afterwards. But as I've mentioned in the previous session, I said to you, and I didn't allude to what I thought was going to be the biggest constraint and problem area for our industry is certainly not going to be the ports. I think given some of our recent conversations with Transnet, and I've seen the Transnet turnaround strategy, I think within at least the next 12 to 18 months, we should see a big turnaround. In particular, with the international private operator coming into Pier 2, the public-private partnership with the International Container Terminal Services, we're hoping that firstly that's going to take place. We're putting a lot on the back of that, and we should see some turnaround on that. So as I've mentioned to you in the introductions, the biggest constraint I think is going to come from transportation, and in particular from the northern region, because in the last session, as I showed you, the growth that's coming from the northern region is quite a lot more than what I think we're going to be able to handle from the different aspects in our logistics chain, and principally on the transport side. Given some of our current limitations on rail transportation, and we're going to have a lot of discussion on that, and hopefully we're going to see a lot more positive traction on the trains to offset the demand in road transportation. So certainly today's topic is going to be principally about transportation, and I'm going to show you some of the key statistics on that, and hopefully that'll inspire some discussion. And then we're luckily and fortunate enough to have Jan-Louis Spoelstra on with us this morning at short notice, who will give us a policy update on rail, to really give us an update on where the future of the rail transport in South Africa lies, and in particular for our industry, where we can capitalize on it.
Sorry, I muted there. Sorry. Yeah, we are very keen to hear what's going on, and just as a catch up since last week, what has been the feedback that's happening in the ports? I've just as a brief overview, I've seen some articles saying that there's cranes and stuff that's been coming in and all sorts of things. Can you maybe just give us a brief update on what's happening?
Yes, so you would have seen that I wrote a newsletter to the citrus growers on Friday, highlighting some of our concerns going into the current season. Our concerns, I think, are very valid. Obviously, you may be a bit sensitive to what's been circulated, depending on where you are in the chain. But we must also remember that our principal goal is to ensure that our farmers are very much aware of what's happening there, because we represent farmers and we make sure that they are acutely aware of what some of the constraints are in that specific environment. And we have to do that to ensure that they're prepared. So that's what that was really about. And I'll be honest with you, and perhaps Jan-Louis might want to touch on that as well a bit later, is with the inception of the National Logistics Crisis Committee from last year, when we had that meeting with the president, he invoked that, as well as a change in almost the entire Transnet leadership. Although we were expecting some immediate turnarounds there, we've obviously got to understand that the challenges remain not an immediate fix, because as I mentioned to you, the equipment challenges are quite severe, and that's going to take a bit of time to bring in the right equipment to ensure the terminals turn around. So that was the first set of information we're going to be just giving back to growers. The CRI Packhouse workshops are currently underway, and I did an online presentation, which I've actually received some very good response from farmers on that. So thank you for that, as well as our board. And we will be doing quite often. I'll be writing just this newsletter just on the current sort of operational environment. on the back of the fact that we are anticipating quite a big crop this year. It will be surprising if it isn't, given the feedback we're getting from the growers. So the pressure on the ports is going to be quite severe, and in the newsletter I highlighted that quite well. But at the moment, we're still seeing the same sort of thing. It is actually, positively enough, quite a bit of recovery. Durban has now only got 8 vessels outside, which is quite good, Pier 2 mostly. The Kucha PE terminal is working very well. Cape Town is now this morning down to 5 vessels forward Cape Town, so they are recovering. Unfortunately, the wind is coming back in again today until Sunday, so that's going to offset the recovery we're seeing there. But as I mentioned to you in the previous presentation, Cape Town is not really a worry for us, because by April it rebalances itself and is set well for the citrus season. It's really, I think, Durban that we're focusing and very concerned about. But we are, as I mentioned, we're going to be meeting with Transnet in the next 2 weeks, just to talk about how we're going to align to ensure we carry this big crop for the season. So that's where it stands at the moment. So just look out for the good communication that will keep everybody in touch with. And again, the WhatsApp groups, I've now got 230 people of that WhatsApp group, and providing daily communication through the season. Yeah, so keep up to date with those communication platforms.
Yeah, I've also shared it to a number of like the deciduous fruit people down here. So it's just good info to have, because you share it on there all the time. It's good for them to know what's going on.
Yes, as we go into the season, I'll be putting a lot more information on where we are and where we're going, and some of my movements as well. I'll take some pictures of where I am, meeting with different people, keeping people up to date with what I'm specifically doing. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
So I think let's not waste time. I'd like to get into the Vision 260 and let's go with the discussion on road and rail. And that's really the essence of today's session, session number 2. So if you just give me a second just to share my screen, I'm just going to put it into presentation mode. We have figured out what was the issue of the last session, why we couldn't get into presentation mode. So we should have that rectified now. Okay, let me know once you see that.
There we go.
Yep, working.
Okay, so we should be in full presentation mode, I hope.
Yes.
Good. Okay, so let's go into it. So this essentially what I'm presenting is the strategic direction on logistics and shipping. As I mentioned in the previous sessions, there are 8 projects, and I'm basically heading up 6 of them, which is centered around logistics and shipping. And shipping, just to mention, is not around anything to do with shipping contracting. It's really just looking at where are the supply of fruit likely to go into markets that are going to expand, and then obviously we're looking at vessels capacity and container capacity, and even going so far as to port capacity in the receiving market. So that's what the shipping is all about, just to clarify that position. Again, just to mention that, obviously we're providing this information in full faith that we're giving you as accurate data as we possibly can, but we've obviously got to understand that we're limited in terms of its accuracy into the future seasons. So there's the 6 projects I'm going to be covering. Last session, we went into the long-term crop projection model and the regional output, and I would encourage people to go and watch that session, because it obviously leads into the next session, which is session number 2, and it's going to focus on inland road and rail transportation. I'm going to re-emphasize this for the new members that are online and people that are watching this for the first time, is that growth in citrus production and exports is imminent. The data that we showed you in the previous session, I certainly believe that the 240 million cartons, which we're estimating, is really going to materialize should all factors be favorable for conditions of exporting. And I do believe that industry and partners should be part of the success of this industry and play their respective roles to ensure that we achieve the actual Vision 260 and the volume, because it's going to have a really positive spin on the industry, positive spin on the farmers, positive spin on the rural development aspects, and everybody's likely to make some money in the process as well, because the more volume that's coming in, there's more opportunity to make some return on that. As I've also mentioned, I think as we go into some of these projects, and particularly on today's session when we talk about road and rail, is we need to see partnerships in the form of exporters and the Fresh Produce Exporters Forum playing a very pivotal role in bringing the exporters and stakeholders together, because they have the commercial arm of their business in terms of contracting specific projects. So as far as we've got in terms of CGA, forthwith we're going to need to partner with those entities that do have the commercial contracts and go out and contract certain initiatives commercially. And we're looking to open up a more efficient and effective logistics system, and obviously trying to hopefully reduce costs at the end of it as well. And I think it's going to be very essential for industry and partners to work together, cooperate, collaborate, and to unlock the logistics and shipping potential as we go into subsequent seasons. Again, just to emphasize the key aspect around the corridors that fruit is grown and exported in the northern corridor from Durban, Maputo, Eastern Cape corridor, the Western Cape corridor from Cape Town. And I'm emphasizing this again because if we're talking about road and rail, if you look at the distances, for instance, from the Durban port upwards into Zimbabwe, which is as far as 1,400 kilometers, it has a much more significant role to play in terms of the road rail dynamics than it does to areas which are closer to the ports. And that's why I'm emphasizing this, is that when it comes to rail, our immediate opportunities and focus should really be on this corridor, because the distance factor really starts to favor rail. I'm not saying excluding these areas altogether. I'm just saying our immediate focus needs to be on there, capitalizing on that, because that's where I see most of the constraints coming in, and with that massive growth that we've shown in the previous slides.
Yep.
And just Louise and Dewald, remember I mentioned I can't see your faces, so if you have a question, please just intercept and then we can discuss it at that point. Thanks.
I will do so.
We'll do so.
Great. Thank you. And let's keep the banter going and the jokes as we did in the last session. Keeps everyone interested. Okay, so let's move into now inland transportation, road and rail. Let's focus on the specific aspects around principally the road transportation demand and how that's going to relay over to the need for rail to come into the space to offset what we are anticipating as a massive road demand, which we, in my view, I think is going to be quite limited in terms of that supply matching that demand. So first and foremost, let's put the glasses on. A very interesting exercise which I've been looking at is obviously understanding the road conditions across the country, where citrus is being produced and where it's being moving to, in particular down to the ports. And the key elements for us to understand how road conditions play a part in the actual, not only the product itself, but the pricing of transportation. Now, what worries me, and it worries me a lot, and I travel the country quite extensively, right across the country. I do it 2 or 3 times a year. I purposely get in my vehicle, and if I go to meetings, I'll drive, so I can see the road conditions firsthand. And what I'm seeing is, because of the movement, in particular, I'm noticing up north from the mineral sort of mining sector, moving trucks down to, say, Maputo, Richards Bay, and to Durban, in vast numbers, that the road conditions are now starting to deteriorate quite extensively. And I know one example for you is the N2, which had a complete overhaul in recent years, is now it's now starting to collapse again. And portions of the N2 are now collapsing to the point where there's not even tar on the roads. And, that starts to then impact our industry, because our product is sensitive running on the road transportation, being subjected to very poor road conditions. The other thing which I'm seeing, and then obviously in the Eastern Cape, the manganese belt, which is moving road trucks in numbers down to the Kucha port, which we've noticed in the last 2 or 3 years has become quite extensive, and it's actually a very big cause for concern as well. The other one which I'm noticing, which is very, very troublesome for me, is the towns and cities. Not so much cities, but more the towns across the inland areas, which are now their roads are being degraded because of huge trucks running through towns, roads are not meant to carry trucks like that. And that's really, really problematic. I mean, we're seeing school kids walking through streets and walking between big trucks running on the roads, and it's a very, very big risk aspect. And I know I had a session with some of the national transport, Department of Transport, and I said they really need to go down to municipal level and find out how they can circumvent these trucks moving directly through towns, and look at bypass roads to get these trucks off the town's roads, to keep the town's roads.
Sorry, Mitchell, to interrupt. I'm also thinking we are in South Africa, and some of these places that they go through are quite, I would say, lower income areas. So there's also the possibility of vandalism happening on the trucks while they're moving through these areas.
Yes, and we've seen that. You've seen the vandalism. You see those videos being circulated. You're also seeing trucks being burnt and those sort of things, but obviously not really much to do with what we're discussing now, but it opens up then for targeting. Then you see, if there's a service protest happening, they will start to then vandalize trucks and put blockages on roads and things like that. That's the mechanism they're using to get their service level issues sorted out. But let's go through this again and talk in detail. What is the issue on road? Is there a question there?
Yeah, I've got another question. I've driven up north, and if you drive between Mpumalanga and Limpopo, there's a clear difference in which province is running what side of the road. Where I've seen Limpopo roads being a lot better quality and better condition with Mpumalanga roads. It's like you drive, there's potholes, and then all of a sudden there's welcome to Limpopo, and then you've got a beautiful road ahead. How is this going to be working between the provinces to get each to do their own?
So there's now it is a concern for me, and yes, you are right to a certain extent, but I can tell you in Limpopo, if we talk about recently I was invited by Guy Whittaker to go up to Waipi to go and have a look at the road there, and I promise you, my vehicle almost didn't make it back, and that's in Limpopo. That's the R521, which is probably, I think, in my view, the worst condition road that I've been on. Where our citrus is moving. And look, I'll be honest with you, we had a board session end of last year. I raised this in the board session, and our board said, look, we can't, a CGA, we don't have the capacity and ability to get involved here. So it was said that it needs to go to localized level. So our farming communities and businesses in these areas should engage with their municipalities and their provincial governments, which I've done. I've been working with provincial Department of Transport to focus on this. But we're not really seeing that, that allocation of funding and road upgrades to the level that we need to see. So let's quickly discuss what this actually means. So, if we talk about citrus running in cartons on trucks now with the high Q pallets, and in particular on those open top cartons, which we see coming to ports and being damaged, and the nesting aspects. If you picture a truck running over a pothole, some potholes are extensively big, and if a truck hits that, you can imagine the penetration on the product in the cartons, and that if it's continuous over 1,000 kilometers, it can be problematic. So it has a very big impact on product quality, in particular some of our sensitive carton types, and particularly in the open tops. And I would strongly encourage growers and pack houses to make sure that you use the securing sheets. We see some product arriving to port not using those securing sheets. They have to comply with, or should comply with, the CRI packhouse, CRI packaging guidelines. Vehicle damage, if you consider the axles and low beds that get damaged when these vehicles hit the roads as well, if it's continuous, it can be very problematic and start to become incredibly expensive for transporters to repair trucks. Fatalities goes without saying. We've seen the fatalities on the roads. Because I've seen it as well. I've almost nearly been written off a number of times where trucks have to divert from hitting a pothole and come onto the oncoming traffic, and obviously then you're subject to having a collision. So if you're traveling on the road, you have to really be focused on the traffic ahead of you, and obviously at night it's very, very dangerous as well. The big concern for me as well is if transporters start to say, look, we don't want to go to certain areas because of the road conditions not being favorable for our trucks, are getting damaged, we're getting product damage in the ports, getting quality claims. So you have a risk of transport supply, and we don't want that to happen aligned to the growth that we're expecting in our industry. We want all the roads to be as good condition as possible, so there's no limitation or hesitation from transporters to enter into those areas to pick up fruit for transporting to port. So that obviously is a very big cause of concern. Then the other one is also very concerning, is obviously transport cost. If there's product damage happening, you get increases on your insurance. The trucks themselves who start to get damaged, incurring damage, traveling down terrible roads, the insurance and maintenance costs start to go up. So it does have an impact on transport costs. So yes, again, it's something we really need to get on. And if you have a look at that table I've got there, look at the number of orange lines, which is in Mpumalanga, Limpopo, Eswatini, Eastern Cape. When I travel there, the roads are, I wouldn't say in very bad condition, but they're not in pristine condition. And obviously they're very narrow and twisty and windy. If you look at Citrus Dole, I think that needs to be updated. You'll know, Deovoth, I think the Olifants River Bridge should be corrected now and repaired, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we were there Friday, and there wasn't any issues going into town there.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll update that. I would like to mention to you, and I don't want people to take this in the wrong way, but it was so interesting. I had a meeting with Minister Meyer, who's the MSc for Agriculture in the Western Cape, a number of years ago. And on the side of a meeting, he said to me, listen, I want to let you know that my focus is to ensure that our farmers in the Western Cape, the roads that are moving your product are going to be completely overhauled and are going to be in pristine condition. And you guys in the Western Cape will know he's actually done that. If I travel through the Western Cape, the roads are really good. I mean, okay, now and again, you will see some damage here and there, but by and large, I think he's actually achieved that. And I've seen a lot of road upgrades happening in the Western Cape to the farming community.
Yes,
Indeed.
definitely. Definitely.
Definitely. So that's what we need to sort across other provinces. Yeah.
Minister Meyer does a fantastic job here, and the fact that he's so vocal and in your face with with all of these issues is a good thing.
Yes, and we meet with them regularly, and I always like to say to well done on all these different initiatives that he puts in. This is just one that I thought I would share with you.
And it helps that he has humor, because you know what, you need that in politics too. He's got a great sense of humor and is a showman, and he actually gets things done. So there you go, Minister.
He does. Yeah, absolutely, he does. Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the next presentation. So this is the most important one, and I'm going to just explain to you how this is set out, because you're seeing a lot of numbers. So what do the numbers represent? And I'm just going to give you a case in point, and then it can show you what this relates to across the different regions. So I drilled down to each region that produces citrus, and I looked at their sort of base volume from about 2020, 2023. What did they produce over a week? And what is the growth rate in terms of the 2027 Vision260 growth forecast for that region? I looked at how many trucks are servicing that region each week, and I broke it down to ambient trucks, being your tautliners and your flat decks. Then I broke it down principally aligned to reefer trucks, which move the soft citrus, your mandarins, down to port. And I focused on the green line bars there, isolating that, considering that most soft citrus, if not all, is transported in reefer trucks. So I separated into two truck modes. But since then, I've heard from people in the industry that some of the navals and other commodities are also moving in reefer trucks. So it shows you that these numbers actually can change. And then looking at the last bar there, you'll see the total trucks per region, the growth forecast from the base volume of historical production per week to the 2027 growth forecast, to those numbers you can see on these columns.
Mitchell, can you? Yeah, maybe.
2027. Yeah, there you go. So let's have a look at a very interesting area, but principally around, let's look at, first of all, the growth in ambient trucks. And I'm going to use Lettertelly as a good example for the north, because they're growing quite significantly in Valencias. So the base volume was 19.6 million, going to 22.4 million. The growth forecast 14%. The weekly forecast on the base volume was 483 trucks moving from Lettertelly to port. The growth rate is showing it's going to move up to 546 trucks per week, an additional 63 trucks. So that's probably the highest you're seeing on that, apart from, say, Sanders River Valley, but obviously that's in the north. If we look at Burgersfort, for example, we know that Burgersfort, the triangle between Lydenburg, Burgersfort, and Urikstad, there's significant numbers of late mandarins growing there. And I've consulted with that area, saying that over time, their transport demand on reefer trucks is going to be quite significant. If you have a look at their growth rate, 5.6 million cartons to 12 million cartons, almost double, more than double. Wow. Now an average of 122 trucks moving from there down to port, reefer trucks per week, going to 316 trucks per week. So that's another 194 trucks. So you can imagine if you calculate this. Yes.
Sorry, Mitchell. Is that over the course of the whole Vision260, or is that in like the next year or two?
Yes, so this is going towards 2027. So if you read that top line there, it says the base volume on 2027 season's growth projection. So if we look at the base volume on the last 3 years going to 2027, the peak in terms of the numbers we've shown you in the previous session. So what is actually significant here, if you look at it, is not just the regions, but if you take the regions in total, because remember, transportation is an open system. You might find some growers or pack houses will have fixed contracts with transporters, but by and large, transport operates in an open network. If you look at the numbers on the demand for ambient trucks, additional 250 from 1,800 to 2,100. Look at the reefer trucks, 376 to 935 trucks, additional 600 truck trips a week required for the north. In total, 2,200 to 3,000 truck trips per week, going additional 800. If you look in the Eastern Cape, if we just talk on totals, you can look at these numbers in isolation between the two, 1,150 trucks to 1,500 trucks, additional 300 trucks a week needed. Western and Northern Cape from 950 trucks to 1,400 trucks and another 440 truck trips a week. So in total, countrywide, 4,300 truck trips per week as a base, going to 5,850 truck trips per week in terms of demand forecast. And now I must just also emphasize, I've done this on a zero rail basis. So this considers that there's no rail whatsoever. So we're going to factor that into the next slide. So 1,550 truck trips per week if we don't get rail coming in a formidable presence across the supply chain, particularly in the north. So as I mentioned to you in the last session, the ports, in my view, are not really where our problems are going to come from. I think that's going to be rectified, but certainly transportation is where I think our key issue lies. And that really is where rail needs to come into its space to cater for this extra demand. And
so Mitchell,
I would imagine,
looking at this is huge and it's incredibly significant. Have you spoken to truck transport companies? I'm sure you have. And what is the feedback? And I mean, this actually also represents an opportunity.
And do they have the capacity for that extra 1,500 trucks per week?
So there is the interesting discussion. Some people tell me it'll happen organically, and I criticize that to some extent because we're sitting in a very seasonal production phase. So we don't run from January to December on a very sort of even base. You've seen the previous curves; it has a significant peak. So if we look at that demand, and this is considering trucks in peak weeks, so it's the peak weeks of the season where these trucks need to come in to cater for that demand. I'm very cautious to say that there would be enough trucks to cater for this additional demand. I mean, where are we suddenly going to see another 1,500 truck trips handled per week in our industry, given the seasonal constraints? And if we consider some of the delays that trucks have in the ports and those sort of things, and then, I mean, transport economists can look at this and maybe give us a better answer. But in my view, and and I've had a lot of discussion with transporters and people in industry, I think personally this is where our biggest constraint lies, and that's my point of view.
And another thing is, if there's a demand, there's a price and money to be made. So
there you go.
So it's going to get more expensive.
So look at the reefer truck demand in isolation, because remember, reefer trucks are a very specific modality. So they move cold products from one point to the other, mostly running full one side, empty to another side. If you talk about table grapes from Cape Town, domestically they move them inland in quite large numbers. Do they get the return haul from inland back to Cape Town? I'm not too sure. Then you consider fish moving from Cape Town up to Joburg and the like. It's a very troublesome area for me to think that people are going to buy additional reefer trucks to manage this peak in citrus season, and then have your trucks potentially sitting idle for 8-9 months of the year. And you can ponder this, and I think the answer is self-evident to me.
Yeah, and it's not like a tot liner that you can, once it's empty, you can load it with other stuff. That box must be cleaned, sanitized, and tested, calibrated again for whatever it's got to bring back again. So it's not a quick process.
That's right. So to some extent, in conclusion, if you think about the locality of the Eastern Cape and Western Cape productions regions being quite close to port, the turnaround of trucks we know is quite good in peak season. So they probably move empty inland in quite large numbers to bring product back to port, running full. I've seen that particularly in the table grapes, they run empty inland and run full down to the port. So I don't have too much of a problem there. I think there may be some constraints on the reefer truck side to some extent. But remember, table grapes, and the deciduous season is quite a lot bigger in terms of quantity. So perhaps those areas might be okay. But it's the northern region where it worries me, where we've got, obviously the distances are quite vast. And the hesitation to move trucks empty inland because of the distance and the cost factor. Okay, so this is again where yes.
Again, this is only projected on the citrus volumes. This does not equate things like avos, which fall in the same bracket as well, and blueberries.
Well, that's a very significant point, and I'm surprised I haven't considered that. So we need to bring in avocados and others which run the same, have a demand on trucks as well, right in the middle of our season as well. So yes, very good point to take into consideration. Are there any comments or anything on the chat boxes around this, or are we good to carry on?
Nothing at the moment. I think they're all stunned still.
Yeah. Okay. So again, it's not all doom and gloom. I think it just really sets the precedent that rail transportation is seriously needing to come into the space to create a lot more efficiency, hopefully some cost benefit, but obviously it's the way the transport demand is going, it's going to have to come in to offset that. So I've done an interesting exercise here on this one. It's just putting together what I call a heat map in terms of isolating the different regions, and each of those circles represent the volume towards 2027. If we consider each region's growth around the orange bars being your ambient trucks, and the orange circles being the ambient, and the blue circles being the refrigerator trucks. So it tells us where our demand is going to come from the two modality sets. And then, as you can see in these tables, I've taken the Northern Region demand, the Eastern Cape and Western Cape demand. So areas like Senwes, Groblersdal, Marble Hall, you can see that because of the growth in lemons, navels, and Valencias, massive demand coming from there. Let's on the Valencias, Hoedspruit as well on Valencias and navels. And on the blue bars, you can see the demand coming from Burgersfort, Nelspruit, and also Groblersdal, Senwes. So that's principally where the reefer truck demand comes from, and your ambient demand's coming from there. It is quite interesting when you put this heat map together, that Limpopo River, you can see the size in the bubble there. If you look at Zimbabwe, the bubble's hardly even there. It was very surprising to me that it's such an extensive production, in these areas relative to other areas. It's an exact equation, so it's relative to the size of that market. Then coming down to the Eastern Cape, you can see the Sanders River area. Look at that difference compared to the Eastern Cape Midlands area in terms of its size. And then Potensi, and the Potensi's got quite a big growth in Lake Mandras as well as Sanders River. So as I mentioned to you, look at the closest to the port, probably less problematic than what you see from the northern area down to Durban and Maputo. In the Western Cape, sorry, I've actually hidden the Northern Cape. I need to slide this down. So Citrusdal and up in Boland, we discussed that in the last session quite extensively around that blue circle there. Very high growth in Lake Mandarins, and obviously you know that the other commodities, Citrusdal, a lot of navels, lemons being produced there, and also growing in terms of its Lake Mandarins. But again, look at the closeness to the port relative to the north. So it's very interesting to bring it into that sort of context. And then the key feature on this is that if we look in the northern regions, and as I've said to you, our immediate focus, I believe, needs to be there. And to offset the demand in road transportation from the current demand to the future demand, we're going to need to see 18,000 pallets of citrus moved from the northern regions in collection to the Durban Port, Maputo Port each week. Now, if you break that down, now I haven't put it into containers because there's different modalities which are probably going to come into play, but that represents about, 1,000 containers a week. We're doing about 1,000 in total in the season. We now have to put 1,000 containers on trains to cater for that demand from the north to Durban and Maputo. So it's a very significant undertaking, taking potentially 800 road truck trips a week off from road transport to rail transport.
Mitchell?
Yes.
Of this volume coming in, how much of this will be loaded onto conventional reefer ships, and how much of this are you expected to be going into containers?
So when we go into session either number 3 or number 4, when I mentioned the shipping project, we're going to drill right down into that, and that's going to be its own discussion at that point. And this is really just on road transportation, and there's some very interesting discussions going to come out of that as well, and particularly around the conventional vessels and where we're seeing them in terms of the future. But we're just honing right specifically on transportation at this point. Are we good on that slide?
Yes, we are.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about now some of the solutions. We've talked about where the demand is coming from. Okay, and I'm pretty sure, as I mentioned to you in the last session, the hairs are again standing up at the back of my neck when we talk about transportation. So let's talk about what are some of the solutions and practical steps for exporters and pack houses and farmers to look at in terms of overcoming this demand constraint. Now, if you look here, in terms of citrus, this move to run containers from ports inland empty to a pack house and load fruit into the container, run back down to ports in road transportation it's being done, but not in extensive numbers. And I'm pretty sure we know why. There's two factors, probably a cost factor, and I think some of the main constraint is around the actual mass exceeding the road regulation. But I think I would encourage. Is there a question?
No, it's just interesting that the mass is exceeding what you're allowed to transport.
Yes, there's a reason for that.
There was other legislation about transporting the height of containers. Has all of that been resolved? With that,
I'll answer all of the legislative issues around this as well. So the main thing here, which is actually beneficial to farmers, is that they can pack their fruit directly into containers, and that fruit's not touched until it gets to market. So you can imagine the cold chain benefit, the actual quality of the product benefit. Okay, let's exclude some of the road condition aspects there. You're really getting your product to market in a very good condition, and your cold chain should be mostly intact to market. So it's really good from that point of view. And then obviously your containers, when they get transported to port, are going directly into port stacks. So you're bypassing the cold store, some of the cold store congestion issues there. So it's directing your fruit from your pack house straight to the port where it's plugged in and then put on the ship. So the problematic areas there is obviously the cost aspect. So if you're running a truck with an empty container all the way inland, and let's use Letsetele as an example, for 900 kilometers, it can become, obviously a bigger cost factor than running your fruit by normal trucks down to port. So that's one of the constraints. But some areas would successfully be able to do this. Now, coming to the legislation part of it, the container itself weighs 4.5 to 5 tons, just that box that you see on there. And then you obviously got your cooling unit attached to that. Your trailer unit itself is very heavy. If you look at this one, it's a full steel, probably not even air suspension. It's full leaf spring suspension. It's got dual wheels on there, probably steel. It's got a genset unit on there as well, which is about 500 kilograms. Plus, you've got about 50 to 100 liters of fuel on there. So if you look at the distribution of the weight onto the front drive axles and on the rear axles, you do have a weight distribution problem, particularly on some trucks. Look at this truck. This is probably a 12.5, 13-meter truck. Look at the space difference in the overhang of the front of the container over these axles. So if you're running, say, lemons, and you're packing lemons at 18 kgs per carton, you're not going to be able to get this on and then have your 9-ton axle mass in accordance to legislation. But if you look at the trailer that I'm showing on the top right-hand corner here, Willerton Transport helped us in a study a little while back. And if you see, they developed this truck. It's full aluminium single wheels, air suspension. They've got the fifth wheel at a point where it can distribute the weight quite well. And they were able to get 28 tons into a configuration using this trailer. So it is being done, and to a large extent complying with road regulations. But again, some packing is not really conducive. You've got to be very clever on how you do it. And I've seen some pack houses that are very successful in doing this, and still today run a lot of their product to port using this method. And then the other road regulation, as you mentioned, the 4.3 height. So there is a moratorium at the moment in place, so it's not transgressing the road regulation, but basically your vehicle height has to be 1.4 to allow for the 2.9 meter height of the container. If your truck trailer is higher than 1.4, which in most cases it is, you exceed that for I'm forgetting now the registration. It's for 3.6. Louis can correct me. I know he's very aware of this. So that's where that is. So for now, it's rectified through the moratorium, but still not in totality rectified.
Oh, and another thing also is that genset in the front needs to be accessed by PPECB to calibration. So that's probably why there's a little space in front of the actual container standing there.
Yes, so this is a triaxle trailer. So this normally does general cargo. If you look at the trailer on the right here, the skeletal, there's no front load bed, so they can access it without any hindrance. And this is the type of trailer you actually want to use. It's a purposely built trailer for containers. This is just a dry goods trailer being used for running citrus, which, obviously transporters use it during citrus season, and they'll go and do rice or other commodities in the port. But this is essentially the trailer that you want to run long distance with. When I'm traveling the N3 in other areas, I notice a lot of transporters are using these skeletal trailers, and you very seldomly see these cases. Grapefruit, you'll be fine. Mandarins, you should be fine. When it comes to lemons, Valencias, navels, you may have a weight issue on these particular trailers.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, if you go down to the Western Cape, you will know most pack houses are running trailers straight to their pack houses from the cold store down to port. And then A lot of this is being done, particularly up in the Northern Cape, from Ausengia as well as, from Namibia. This is the way they mostly do it. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly run through some of the rail aspects, and I think we can bring Jan-Louis here in at this point in time. I can't see the screen, so just let me know when Jan-Louis is available.
Okay, I'll add Jan, and I'm going to ask Jan to just briefly introduce himself to the viewers.
All right, I'm going to just quickly introduce Jan-Louis Spoelstra, and while we brought him in, as Jan-Louis Spoelstra has, been with us as a CGA for many years. He's an ex-Transnet employee, and he's in a very good position to give us an understanding of what's happening on the rail policy framework. He knows this a lot better than I do. I could probably tell you in layman's terms, but I'm guessing it's better for a professional person to give us an overview. But in a nutshell, Jan-Louis, if I get it right or wrong, just correct me, that the policy framework is going to start to see a separation of Transnet into the infrastructure manager, when hopefully seeing some private operators on the networks. Transnet itself will become a competing operator, and then it's going to have an evolutionary journey which we need to follow, and then obviously it'll give us some feedback in terms of where we see some benefit on the citrus industry and partners and rail, opening up the space as we've discussed the strategy we need to see on rail traffic. So I'll hand over to you if that's okay. Thanks, Jan-Louis.
No, thank you very much, Mitchell, Gerald and Louise, and the rest of the people online. Just a quick background, Jan-Louis Spoelstra. I'm an industrial engineer. As Mitchell said, worked for many years in the Transnet environment. At this stage, assisting the Dutch through the Flying Swans with feasibility studies, where we will look at setting up for the fruit industry very specific country facilities connected to rail, because I'm very much rail biased. Secondly, I'm an independent board member of the Interim Rail Economic Regulator, and we are setting up this. Sorry, is there some repeat coming? I just need to check if I need to switch my volume a bit down. And then thirdly, I'm also representing BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, on the NLCC working committees, especially on the container corridor through the Port of Durban. And Mitchell, perhaps just one or two remarks. What we achieved on the ports. I've heard that you've mentioned that some of the backlog has been reduced, and we were working quite hard to see what can we introduce to reduce the delays and the backlog of ships waiting to enter the port of Durban. And one of the important parts is that we actually introduced a new rail shuttle, and that is where the Bayet container terminal as a backup port facility is now connected to the port at equal rates to shippers delivering into Bayet or delivering directly into DCT. That assisted, together with some changes in the way we got Transnet to look at the workforce, an additional helicopter that is available in the Port of Durban, and then also a focus on the rail. How can we increase the number of slots available between Durban and Johannesburg on a daily basis, where we're now already over 20 slots. And this is from 8 when we started in the middle of last year. So we are achieving quite a lot of things. Also just on the rail side, we are now focusing to see, can we set a pilot in place to cater rich from Durban that will then also deal with the Hammersdale and the cold stores that Maersk developed in Cater Rich. So that hopefully we will be able to announce quite soon. The main important thing of where we're heading in South Africa is that government, first of all, the cabinet approved the new rail policy, and the rail policy required that we introduce competition on rail. And for this, we started with the process of how do we change Transnet and what do we do with Transnet. At the same time, government went through the process of developing the freight logistics roadmap. And for the people that don't have that, please download Draft 7. That is the one that was approved by Cabinet on the 7th of December from the Department of Transport website. If you go to transport.gov.za, you can download that. And that really gives you more detail on some of the changes that's coming. Now, what is this changes coming? Sorry, Devil, do you have a question?
Yes, there's actually a question that came in from Colin Ramoni. I'll put it up on the screen. The question, has the central rail planning component established, and is the National Rail Master Plan underway?
I will get to that and answer Colin's question just in a bit.
Okay.
But just to say that part of what needs to be implemented at this stage is to say that the old Transnet freight rail, or Spoornet, or whatever you wanted to call it, as we knew it, will no longer exist as you knew it from the end of April. And this is how soon this will be. So to change the whole railway system, it will go through various iterations. So the first is that the physical split is happening inside the Transnet freight rail and also in a PRASA, where the networks, meaning the physical rail line, the stations, the signaling system, everything connected to that, will be transferred into new business units in the two different entities called the infrastructure manager. And Transnet started talking about this as the TRIM, or the Transnet infrastructure manager. And then the remainder will be the operating companies. So you will also find that Transnet will start speaking about the FROC, or Transnet Freight Rail Operating Company. Now, part of the responsibility for the implementation, and that's coming to Colin's question, is that the whole central master planning and longer term planning that will include answering the questions, what portions of the network will be more important and less important? Can we let go of certain parts of the network? That will become a function in the Department of Transport. And we hope that after the government's budget will be published in about 3 weeks from today, that funding will be allowed to create that specific unit within the Department of Transport. So the Department of Transport will be doing the rail planning and then asking the questions, is this branch line important or not? You know, can we get a business case for a very specific area in the country, or where do we need to up capacity and create new capacity? So initially not yet in place, it's still being done, Colin, by Transnet, but hopefully from the middle of the year, we can start transferring that over to the Department of Transport. Just on the TRIM side, from the 1st of April, a separate business unit as part of Transnet Freight Rail. At the end of September, it must be a separate business unit. Like you have TNPA separate from a TPT, you'll have the infrastructure manager separate from the operating company. And then from April 2025, the intention is that this entity, the TRIM, must be a fully corporatized entity that can potentially be moved out of Transnet. So it must have its own board of directors, separate from the Transnet board of directors, to create total independence of the infrastructure provider together with the operating entities. Now,
so sorry to interrupt. Yeah. If I may ask, and again, this is my limited knowledge, and please correct me if I understand this wrong. So Transnet is going to separate the rail part out into its own commercial company, which will still be state-owned, but then private sector can invest into that company. Am I correct in saying that?
No. Not initially, that the private sector can invest directly into TRIM, but if you look at the lines that is operated by TRIM, for example, the main line between Johannesburg and Durban, the potential exists that a concession can be made available where the private sector can then take up the concession on the main line between Durban and Johannesburg, but still subject to the same policy, meaning that from the end of April, open access for any other operating company that wants to compete with Transnet or the concessionaire at that time must be allowed to do that, so that we have multiple operators. Think about the Sunroll and the toll concessions. You know, the toll concessions provided the infrastructure, but we still had all the different trucking companies that can compete with each other on the toll roads. Even if a toll road was managed not directly by Sunroll, but through an agency agreement, with the N3 toll concession or the N2 toll concession or any of those entities.
So it could be at a point where let's say I've inherited 2 billion rand from some long lost grandmother. I can buy my own train and run my own freight on that line.
Yes, Dewald. I would like to suggest, if you have access to a few million, please order your locomotives and your wagons now, because from April you will be allowed to apply for slots or specific schedules on the on the network, and you will be able to run on that. Just a bit more detail, perhaps, that I need to share with this meeting. What is the process going forward? As the independent rail economic regulator, we had meetings with Transnet already on what is called the network statement, as well as the access conditions and the access pricing. And we are just waiting for Transnet and public enterprises to give the go-ahead so that we can release this information publicly as a public consultation process that must commence now in February and be concluded by end of March for implementation in April. And this is where everyone will know what will be the conditions, how do you apply for a slot, and how much you will pay for a slot. What will happen because of this? I think after April, when we start implementing these changes in the country, you will see an explosion in the investment in new rolling stock and new locomotives by the private sector. I will not be surprised if within the first 2 years of the implementation, a total of more than 100 billion rands worth of investments will be announced. Not just for the fruit industry, Mitchell, but this will also be for the chrome that you've seen there in Mpumalanga running. It will be for the coal to make sure that the volumes to RBCT can be recovered. Iron ore, the manganese going to Port Elizabeth and Nuga coming out of the Northern Cape, that we can put that on rail. But also what from my side we're very interested is also how do we create these reefer train sets that can run from the Limpopo area down to the different ports. And that is quite interesting. The reefer containers can be handled. We've shown it, it works. And the only thing required now is we need to get the operator for that service. Perhaps initially in the first month, it can still be Transnet Freight Rail, but it can very soon go over to a new private entity. And these private entities can be any one of the current 6 or 7 that already expressed interest, but there's also the opportunity for new entrants to come into being.
And another question, and a very important one: what's the status of the actual railroad infrastructure, the physical train lines that they've got to go on? Is it in such a way that it can kick off tomorrow and will be working?
I want to say yes. There is some areas where we need to look at perhaps just improving the quality. So there is some areas with a bit of a speed restriction where you cannot run at 70 or 80 kilometers an hour on the train, but perhaps at 30. But for the majority of the network, whether it's from Usina, whether it's from, let's say, Teletsanin or Hoedspruit or Nelspruit, those networks all exist and the trains can run. Or also, just as a remark, if you look at the fruit that was already moved on rail last year from 2 places up country, it was out of City Deep, connected to the cold stores on the East Rand. Was it CGA Logistics, Mitchell? I can't remember the exact name. And then the other from Bella Bella. There were more than a 99% success rate with all of that fruit arriving on time for the correct vessel and at the correct quality in the port, where the cold chain were maintained all the way from the cold stores right into the receiving clients, whether it was China or Europe. And to expand this will be quite beneficial to the citrus growers and also the avocado growers. Let me add them. They already have some of the cold stores up country. We don't have enough cold store just to connect to this changed railway environment for fruit on rail. But can it work? Yes, it will work. Will it work this year? Limitedly, yes, because the investment hasn't started. Will it work from 2025? and be in place for the volumes that Mitchell put on the table just now for 2027? I believe it will. And I will believe that you may see up to 40% of the fruit potentially coming from some of these areas being capable of being served with a rail-based solution by 2027. But changes are happening now. Look out for when we publish the network statement, the access costs, the access agreements. And for public comment, please submit your comments from February when it will be out in the public. I'm sure the President will make some remarks on this, Mitchell, next week during his SONA speech.
Jan-Louis, that is incredible news. That's the best news we've heard in a very long time, and let's hope the potential turns into reality. Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Yes.
It's only a pleasure. Thanks to Ewald, Mitchell. You're welcome to contact me again. And people know my contact, or they can reach me through LinkedIn if they have any contribution to share with me. Thank you very much.
Yes, and from our side, thank you, Jan-Louis, and thank you for coming on at such short notice. Dear Louise, I've got one or two slides left, just a couple of closing remarks on Jan-Louis' comments, and then just understanding, how we should position ourselves as an industry going forward in rail. And I just want to show you some of the current rail opportunities and what we'd like to see into the future based on some conversations we're having with people who are wanting to get into the rail space. So I'm just going to present my slides again, if you just give me a second.
Sure. I'm going to keep Jan-Louis on in case he wants to comment on something.
No, perfect. Yes, I would like him to comment. He's actually very much a part of a lot of these developments. So just let me know when you see that again on your screen.
It's on.
Okay, great. So in summary, and look, I'll be honest with you, I've given some thought to as you mentioned, some of the investment that needs to be made, and having a chat to some of the investors that are waiting, rail operators waiting to invest. Some of the complication may come in the fact that hopefully when you inherit that money from your great-grandmother, it's not millions, it's billions, because if we consider rail assets that we need to bring aligned to the fruit industry, let's not just talk citrus, because I'd like to see the compatibility of rail development running citrus and citrus season, and going back to table grapes and deciduous season, so we can have a much more balanced view on our rail deployment and have much better economies of scale. I'm sure Jan-Louis will agree with that. So that investment is going to be quite significant. And, obviously we must understand in terms of reefer, the specific rail sets we need to have, the coupling of the cables, the genset units, the locomotives themselves. So it brings into question how, the pricing competitiveness against Transnet freight rail, which runs wagons which are offset in terms of depreciation quite extensively in terms of the locomotives. So the comparison between a new entrant coming in will be interesting to see. And that's why I put in my closing remark on this one, watching the evolutionary journey that lies ahead, because I do believe it's going to be an evolution. And we need to, as an industry, I think, chatting at board level, we need to really come down and start to select partners that have the ability to match our requirements, and then start to select those partners if we can on specific projects. But obviously, there's going to be some running organically. So to close off the discussion on rail, there's two specific aspects which are very interesting: is the long-term, or let's say the long-distance rail transportation models, which we are discussing with a few entrants at the moment. Those are currently in place, and those that are earmarked to be developed into the future. And then I want to talk a bit about what Jan-Louis mentioned on some of the short-distance rail. We talk about Cato Ridge as well as Belleville, Balcon. So I'm going to close off with these two specific ones. So if we have a look at this this presentation, as I mentioned to you, our goal is to try and move 18,000 pallets from the north to the port of Durban. And potentially Cape Town, because as we move into these, high volume reefer train sets, we may see some obstruction on say the Durban-Maputo corridor. And if we start targeting Europe, it makes a lot more benefit to move out of Cape Town, where you can get to market a lot quicker. But we obviously got to talk about the distance and the pricing, and hopefully some return cargo on that. But the immediate one, if you have a look at this green bar here, it signifies the short-term potential for City Deep and areas around Gauteng. The current operations, as Jan-Louis said, Maersk Corporation with Enstra Cold Store is running via City Deep. You have the group of CA Steinweg Bridge, which are also running citrus down from that area to the port as well, and they have been doing for the last couple of years, and that's still in place. I do believe Instra is running a cold store, which is just outside, I think it's close to Springs, Jan-Louis, and Sea Steinbeck Bridge is about to invest in significant cold store capacity in City Deep. So there it already immediately opens up an opportunity for, the cold treatment aspects, any cold requirements on citrus, and even table grapes, which are running now from Groblersdal, to Durban and Cape Town. So there's going to be some immediate opportunity from City Deep and Gauteng. And those that need to, I know of. I don't know if there's any more. We must get partners to come and talk to us if there are anything that we need to know. The Bella Bella operation, which is being run by Althea Tyson, Cole, I think it's still Cole Jan-Louis, I'm not 100% sure. I'm hoping that Althea is actually on. I did invite her. And that's been running for many years. And, and as Jan-Louis says, the operations of rail have run so well from that area. It's actually quite remarkable, given some of the challenges that have experienced on rail of late, how well they've been doing out of Bella Bella. And hopefully we'll see sometime in the future the rail linkage directly into Groblersdal Marble Hall, so that they can eliminate that 60 to 80 kilometer round trip to Bella Bella, because Groblersdal sits just outside Bella Bella, and there's a bit of an issue with the rail linkage into that area. So that'll continue. And as you can see, the growth from Groblersdal, it's only going to expand, I think. And as we get into the evolutionary journey, as I mentioned, I think there's going to be a lot of good progress happening on that particular frontier as well. Moving into Lucentlands, Jan-Louis has been working on a project, as you mentioned, with the Flying Swans around building cold store capacity in Zanin. And I believe Jan-Louis said that should be coming on stream sometime soon, which will run trains also down to Durban and Cape Town. Very promising. There's also been some discussion around facilities in Hoedspruit as well. But let's see what happens there in the future. Very nice site there around Clisseria. I've been to see it. And then also there's been a lot of discussion around the Messina area. And there has been some containers packed from Messina down to port. But, with the EU regulations and a lot of the Valencias that are grown there, it does have to have the cold stores located there. And if we also spoke about in the previous sessions, the growth in Zimbabwe, it makes a lot of sense for them to jump onto that development as it happens into the future. Maputo is a very interesting one. We did discuss it last week, and I think there's a slide that's going to come specifically on this corridor, and some potential that Grunwald is looking into in building very big investment in cold store capacity or somewhere on the N4 corridor. We're going to be going to see it in about 2 or 3 weeks' time, linked with DP World on that as well. That'll carry through that whole sort of Maputo corridor belt into those markets. But there's a particular project that needs to be developed on that front. As I've also mentioned, some opportunities between Eastern Cape and Western Cape. There's a lot of fruit that moves between the ports, not only in deciduous season, but also in citrus season. So into the future, we should hopefully see some traction on some movement between those particular areas as well. But again, I'd also like to start to see some more frequent linkages between the Western Cape and up into Gauteng, so we can divert a bit of fruit from Durban, particularly up into the Northern Hemisphere markets. Have you got any comment on that before I move on? Yeah.
I've got a question, and it's pertaining to cold storage and this transport. With the fruit from Zimbabwe, they must go into bond in South Africa. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with Eswatini and with Botswana once they come online as well. Will that fruit also need to go into bond storage, or will the agreements be in place between South Africa and them to put it into normal storage on the side?
Yeah, unless I stand to be corrected, I believe anything that's not in South Africa would need to come through in bond. And Eswatini does come into bond. The facilities that manage this cargo are currently bonded facilities, and they go through a particular clearing and forwarding process for that in-bond cargo. So yes, you're right. But the Africa Free Trade Agreement is something that I've put onto Albert Coetzee. I'm hoping Albert may be on here as well. I believe we need to look at exactly what you've mentioned there, what the process would be going into the future on that, transiting cargo from this region through.
Because if I remember correctly from the citrus live stream to China, is that the only bond store for Zimbabwe was at Hammersdale. So all their fruit had to come down to Durban.
Yes, they are. I think Zimbabwe is now using about 3 facilities in South Africa for their fruit, and so does Eswatini.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a very good point you've made there, so I'll take that back.
Yeah, Dewald, perhaps just to mention, previously Zimbabwe fruit were containerized and run out of the Musina intermodal terminal on rail down to Durban. Yeah. So that is still possible. It's just that when you construct a cold store in the Musina or Beitbridge area, you will have a separation between who will or what part will handle the Zimbabwean fruit and what will handle South African fruit. There must just be a physical separation between the fruit.
Correct, yeah.
Mitchell, can I just mention one or two other aspects? And on the investments itself, you do have the option to commence operations on rail using second-hand equipment from Transnet. So part of the Transnet changes will be that nearly all the locomotives and wagons will go into a leasing company. And potentially this leasing company will have the majority shareholding coming from the private. And people will be able to lease it from there. You also have the option to purchase new. Now, what is the difference between new and the second-hand from Transnet? It's weight. A new wagon may be 8 tons lighter than the existing ones with Transnet. So for every train moving up and down, if it's a 50-wagon train, it's perhaps 400 tons that you're not moving up and down. And it's for 400 tons that I don't need a locomotive and I don't need energy. So quite soon, your transport cost may work out on that very specific scenario. It is then with that you also look at even the shorter distances with a Cato Ridge. What is important with Cato Ridge is that it's a significant area where Maersk currently bring in loaded reefer containers, but for some of the big retailers in South Africa, filled with non-cold items like clothing. So we have availability of empty reefers in the Cato Ridge, and that's one of the reasons when I need to get the empty reefers up country, I need to have a service linking Cato Ridge to the port, but also Cato Ridge to up country. So just understand where the importance of some of these back of port facilities, whether it's a Balkan or Cato Ridge, will come in as well. On the Marble Hall, I hope to get that line fixed at one stage. It will be R1 billion to go and put back the line, but we will have to do the feasibility, and I think it will be a viable project, Gewald.
Yeah. Thanks, Louis. So just to close off on this slide, why I've put a very significant dot there at Johannesburg is for two reasons. If you look at the investments needed across the specific areas, it's a very big investment, and maybe the seasonality constrains that return on investment and I'm not saying foregoing any investment, I'm just saying the proposal in terms of a really good economies of scale investment around Johannesburg, and why it works so nicely is you capture the entire region's volume on citrus from start of the early lemons to the later sort of mandarins coming from this area. So you have an opportunity to capture quite a big volume. And the other one is obviously looking at the Durban to Johannesburg. And as Jan-Louis said, when rail works, it works incredibly well. There's no better way to get your containers into a port terminal than it is by the rail transportation. And when it works, it works incredibly well. But look, there are, as you say, some incidences where it's been problematic, but there's been intervention to sort it out. Your time from Johannesburg to Durban on sweating your asset is quite good if you look at the throughput times at the moment. So you can sweat your asset quite well running there. Then the other one, which I think is also very important for us to consider, is what commodities can we bring in on empty reefer containers from Durban to Johannesburg or Cape Town, where you can unpack and let those goods go to where. And the automotive industry is one good example, trying to get automotive components back into reefer containers, not on, but switched off an NOR container, and then loaded with citrus and deciduous brought back to port. So that's a really interesting dynamic. We consider that. So moving on, I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to just go a bit quicker. So looking at Maputo, the interesting thing here, some dynamics around Maputo is really the cross-border issue is number one, is that, we heard last year very, very good cross-border transactions with trucks carrying citrus into the port, considering the bottlenecks of dry bulk minerals moving through the corridor there. But if we look into the real sort of practical measures, is really trying to get onto the rail aspect from the N4 corridor to get into ports. Why is that? Why do I say that? Firstly, because if you look at the rail network going into DP World specifically, the actual rail lines run right next to the reefer stack, so you penetrate the port quite well. You can bring in empty containers from DP World into this area and obviously have your fruit pre-cleared by the Department of Agriculture, the various inspection processes. The other problem is obviously the protocol requirement, which doesn't allow fruit from South Africa to be inspected in Maputo and then sent out of the port. I'm not saying it's not going to be not able to be happen and overcome. We could do it, but there is a constraint from the department on that front. So if we're going to target markets like Japan, and China in very big volumes, we may need to look at doing it from the South African side, and then your containers run down to port in Bond under cold treatment on a reefer track. So I think Grindrod at the moment are looking at that project. And then if we just couple onto that, the existing facilities in Maputo, which I'm going to talk about in subsequent slides, but I just want to mention it now. There's been significant investment there running fruit into Maputo, and that's going to continue. I expect that to expand quite well. But to really really expand on the grapefruit belt in this area where most of the grapefruit's grown into Japan, China, South Korea, would need to be looking at a model of that sort of thing. That's what it indicates at the moment. We're still doing a business case on the Maputo model, as you see here. But as I say, there are existing facilities where fruit is running into the port.
And going up to Beira?
Say again?
Can you go up to Beira port from there?
Well, I don't know if there's a rail linkage at the moment up to Beira. I don't believe there maybe there is. I haven't looked at it, so I actually can't answer that. But I also think, why would you want to go to Beira where you can get to Durban? I would imagine a lot more efficient and cheaper. If you look at our growth, or where our fruit is growing, Beira is quite well out of the geographical sort of picture there. We must use ports that are closest.
If I can just come in, the rail line out of Maputo to the north is the Chikwalakwala line that runs into Zimbabwe. And then you need to go via Harare down to Beira. There's no direct linkage between Beira and Maputo on rail. Beira also, although it's an excellently managed port by Cornelder, and I know the owner of Cornelder very well, it is a shallow port, and you will have significant additional time in getting vessels or boxes to market, because it will have to be transshipped in other ports.
Okay.
So moving on, if we talk about what Jan-Louis mentioned, and if we talk about the growth rate in Durban, and the next session I'm going to show you some of the growth in container volumes leaving Durban, and if we highlight some of the current penetration issues of trucking into the port, we want to, in fact, even Transnet are siding with us with this. It's in terms of their strategy is to get short distance rail sites going where we can move containers from the port inland and from inland down to the port. So it talks very much to Transnet strategy, and obviously the Durban Port master plan as well. So what we've done, what is happening at the moment is, and I'll talk principally in Maersk, and I'm not going to eliminate any of the other business models which are currently coming into play, but just to highlight what Maersk have done is they've built a facility up at Cater Ridge linked to their investment with pre-cooled cold store, and there's some other facilities going to be invested in here in the near future. And they've got an empty container depot which is being positioned there, which can run on the Natcor line down to Durban. So at some point in time, they're going to be able to run empty containers up into this area, have them serviced, and then supply to the cold stores that are linked into that area that are going to come in the short space of time. Then they can run those containers down to port. So that opens up a really good opportunity. And there's a lot of, if you come into Cater Ridge, anyone who's been there, you can see the expansion that's happening there is incredibly progressive. So sometime in the near future, there's going to be quite a formidable rail linkage that's going to happen from there. The other one, which will be interesting to see, is the clothing manufacturers, very formidable ones like Mr. Price and Pep and Ackermans, and all of them are here. The opportunity to run clothing and household goods in refrigerated containers so they can unpack here and then repack citrus back down to port. So we're not running empty containers, we run full up and full down. That's the business model that was pitched to Maersk for that investment. So that's going to happen. And then obviously we'll learn from other stakeholders that will be investing in there what's going to happen. And the other opportunities around Durban South, there's some very big cold stores that are positioned in this area. So is there a likelihood of some rail terminal expansion into the port from that sort of South Durban basin? A recent Fresh Plaza article stated that Transnet are looking at a back of port site. And I'm going to meet with Transnet just to see where they're going with that, and then align to see how industry can align with that. So basically it talks very much to what we put in there. So this is the short distance opportunities, and then maybe there might be some other sites we could look at into the future, but the immediate opportunities definitely lie on that opportunity. So hopefully we're going to see some traction there very, very soon. And I'm guessing this year might be the year we can coerce Maersk and the other partners to start actually getting that into implementation, if you consider what I'm going to show you in session number 3. Can we move on, or are we good?
Yeah.
We good?
Good.
Perfect. Another very exciting one is, again, Maersk building, and you've seen some of the news articles, and I've also released some videos of the containers from Balcon, Bellville, going into the port of Cape Town, not only into CT, the main terminal, but also to FPT. And I believe from the last time I spoke to them, they're going to be building quite a big size cold store at the Balkan site. And then obviously there will be an opportunity to run your fruit there for cooling and then packing containers and running into port as well. So we're seeing very good, the industry is moving in the right direction in terms of rail development. And I think looking at the deciduous season, and our colleagues on the deciduous side will tell you more on that, when the port gets windbound, it actually does provide a really good penetration mechanism to drop off containers and then run them by rail down to the port. So again, let's hope that we see this traction on this happening quite soon. And I haven't put anything on Eastern Cape, but as I said to you, we're looking at the short-term immediate opportunities, and then we need to evaluate with partners that come with proposals on different other areas that we can link into as well. Because as I've shown you, the Sanders River area has got a huge growth on citrus, and we hopefully can see some rail activity in there into the future. And dear Walt, Louise, that comes to the end of the slide, and I'm hoping it's been very interesting and very fruitful for everybody online. It certainly does leave a lot of food for thought. Am I right?
It's really interesting, and we've had quite a few people watching while we were talking. Only the one comment from Colin or question. But yeah, I think there's a heap of fantastic info that was given now. Thank you for your input. Pretty sure we're going to have you on again.
For sure.
Yes, and in the concluding remarks, I would like to, again, as I stated in the start of it, that it's really going to need exporters and those that are involved in the actual logistics contracting from a commercial point of view to really start to align to rail development and work in collaboration with each other to start to unlock these rail potentials. The farmers are going to need to have this access to rail. As I've said to you on the road transportation, it just has to happen. We cannot take a back seat and expect everyone else to. We all got to get involved and align to these projects. So as we move on, we'll align with FPF and our CGA board and see how we can come together on a really sort of common strategy on unlocking this and getting the collaboration going on putting together the footprints on rail. We have to do it. Thank you very much, Louise and Deerwald, and thank you again, Louise.
Thank you. Very interesting and very exciting.
See you for the next session, and stay tuned. It's going to get more interesting.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have a fantastic day and all the best on that side.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.